The upcoming She-Hulk series on Disney Plus will see fan-favorite comic book hero Jennifer Walters come to life in live action for the first time. The trailers indicate that her cousin, Bruce Banner, will be helping her on her road to become an Avenger. Which got me thinking about an old video idea that I've had for a really long time. Ever since Avengers Endgame, I've seen a lot of fans complain that Bruce Banner, Hulk's character arc throughout the MCU is not a good one, that it's weak, it's a disappointment, that there wasn't enough time dedicated to him. On that last point, I couldn't agree more. Not nearly enough runtime is focused on the Hulk's journey through the MCU. The character's distribution rights are owned by Universal, so Marvel can't make a Hulk-titled film, therefore a movie focusing just on the Hulk, without splitting the profits. And above all else, Marvel, Disney, they're corporations, soulless corporations, who'd rather not split the gains with a rival studio. Despite Marvel regaining the rights to several of its most popular characters that were sold off in the 1990s post-bankruptcy, the rights to an official movie remain with Universal. Disney bought Fox a couple of years ago, and with that comes Fantastic Four, the X-Men, other characters that we'll soon see in the MCU. Marvel's even made an unprecedented deal with Sony to co-produce Spider-Man films that take place in the cinematic universe, giving us the current and popular version of the character. He even got to chill out recently with his predecessors thanks to multiverse shenanigans. But Dr. Bruce Banner, the Hulk, remains an outlier. Marvel Studios made one Incredible Hulk film in partnership with Universal prior to being purchased by the Mouse Overlord, which many forget was released about a month after that first Iron Man film became ground zero for the nearly 30 films and half-dozen shows that now make up the MCU. It's also easy to forget that Iron Man was in fact a Paramount partnership. In those early days of the MCU, Marvel wasn't able to distribute their films and had to ally with more established corporations. After the success of Iron Man, Disney bought Marvel, allowing them to distribute their films and leaving behind virtually any chance of the Jade Giant returning in his own feature film. So instead of a multi-film solo movie arc in the vein of Iron Man, Captain America, or Thor, Hulk's story was relegated to just the major event films, and even shared Thor Ragnarok with the titular Asgardian. Bruce went through several changes, both in character and in his relationship to the Hulk, but because of limited screen time, he wasn't able to experience more in-depth and nuanced phases of growth the way that other Avengers were. At least it seems that way at first glance. The point of this video, however, is to explain how I see the Hulk's journey through the MCU, and what I believe the screenwriters, Mark Ruffalo and Kevin Feige, had in mind. It's there if you look for it with the right perspective. And I believe Bruce Banner's arc is one of the more profound ones in the MCU, at least to people with a certain set of experiences. And that's where our friend Subtext comes in.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
No, the Hulk wasn't given nearly enough screen time or narrative real estate to offer a truly satisfying nor obvious arc for most people. But when we consider the subtext of each of Bruce's 6 appearances, well, 7 if you count Iron Man 3's post-credits scene, and how each appearance builds on previous ones, we can learn quite a lot about our tragic hero and his journey through the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's much more powerful than you might realize. Personally, I think it's the strongest there is. First, I'd like to ask you, and this is the only video that it ever makes sense to say this in, smash that like button. Pretend you're the Hulk and the like button is like, I don't know, one of those Shatari dudes or, the Ultron bot or whatever. Also, if you're not subscribed, you're gonna make me angry. And you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. I get really mopey, passive aggressive, kind of snarky. Just get really kind of shitty attitude. And then I'll apologize later. It's really cringe. Please subscribe. There are links below and on screen for how you can support this channel, the same way that the Hulk supported that f***ing mountain in 1984's Secret Wars. Won't you be my Hulk? Fuck. 2022 is the 60th anniversary of The Incredible Hulk, created in 1962 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The Hulk has appeared in many forms of media over his 6 decades, beginning of course with comic books, and quickly being adapted into a very low-budget cartoon. He was a hit with kids, the primary readership of comic books back then. A couple of other animated series were made in following decades, including in 1982 and 1996. But it was back in 1978 when the Green Goliath became a household name with the debut of the Incredible Hulk TV series.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Starring Bill Bixby as Dr. Banner and Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk himself. People of all ages enjoyed this adaptation, and it went on for 80 episodes and 5 made-for-TV movies. And with the show's success, there were attempts to build a Marvel television universe, as both Daredevil and Thor were featured in the hopes of creating enough interest for a spin-off series. That plan didn't work, but the Hulk was seared into the public consciousness. In 2003, a Hulk movie directed by Ang Lee was released to middling critics' reviews and a resounding thud with audiences, with the consensus being that, although ambitious in style, the film was tonally a mess and, worst of all, kind of boring. Not to mention, the visual effects were just not quite ready to capture the Hulk in a believable way. But that didn't stop Universal from developing a sequel, which would be retooled in the lead-up to the launch of Marvel Studios, to coincide with Iron Man as the first 2 entries in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Incredible Hulk is often overlooked, probably because, for one, Bruce Banner is played by Ed Norton instead of Mark Ruffalo. The design of the Hulk himself is different from future appearances, and because it's not on Disney Plus probably, it's on HBO Max. It's weird. But nonetheless, it is an official part of the MCU, and that's where we begin.
You think you can control it?
No, not control it, but I don't know, maybe aim it.
I know a few techniques could help you manage that anger.
Man, it pisses me off when people ignore this movie. Oh shit. Oh no.
I went from a tiny twink to the muscle-bound freak you see before you.
The Incredible Hulk is an odd entry, to be sure, other than the main actor being one we'd never see again, which wouldn't be the last time that it happened. It's the only MCU film to assume that you've seen previous versions of the character. Like I said, this was initially planned as a sequel to the 2003 Hulk, which is evident in how the Hulk's origin is just skimmed right over during the opening title sequence. On top of that, the imagery used to depict the Gamma experiment which creates the Hulk is clearly meant to evoke the old TV show. So it's a weird approach. I mean, 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger doesn't ask you to recall the 1990 Cap film that saw him sporting rubber ears and faking tummy aches so he could steal cars.
Would you pull the car over, please? I think I'm going to be sick.
Once we exit the opening titles, we find Dr. Bruce Banner in Brazil, isolated, hiding out, and keeping a low profile. As Banner meditates, a helpful on-screen graphic tells us he's 158 days without an incident, which we know refers to the last time that he transformed into the Hulk. Bruce is constantly checking his heart rate with a wrist monitor, and he attends lessons in which he learns pranayama, an ancient breathing technique that originates from yogic practices. The purpose of pranayama is to strengthen the connection between the body and the mind. And according to research, pranayama can actually promote relaxation and mindfulness. It's also proven to support multiple aspects of physical health, including lung function, blood pressure, and brain function. The focus on Bruce's breathing and heart rate seems to have caused a misunderstanding for some fans. One blog that I found about the MCU Hulk complains that his condition is purely physiological and it's not rooted in trauma like his comics counterpart. Yeah, responses like increased heart rate, stress-induced anger outbursts, meltdowns, anxiety, panic attacks, They are physiological symptoms, but the fact is that those responses begin somewhere in the mind. And very often, those responses are triggered by an initial trauma. When you get scared, such as narrowly avoiding a car crash or even just a well-placed jump scare in a horror movie, your heart rate spikes. That increase in your heart rate is a physical response to emotional and/or psychological stimuli. That's the human body working the way that it should. However, in trauma survivors, that response can become stuck on repeat. A single traumatic event can cause the mind and body to trigger a physiological response, even once the traumatic incident is no longer at play. The mind doesn't distinguish between actual threats to our safety and often normal, everyday occurrences. We enter fight or flight mode, which the Hulk is the superhero manifestation of. He either reacts by fighting his threats, or he flees to be left alone, often both. So maybe you were in a terrible car crash years ago, and now sometimes when you go to get in your car to drive somewhere, your brain releases the stress hormones norepinephrine and cortisol, which induce a trauma response. Your heartbeat spikes and you become disoriented as your mind triggers a warning, trying to protect you from repeating the trauma, despite the fact that you're not in immediate danger. Bruce Banner's ongoing struggle with transforming into the Hulk is the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde superhero allegory for any number of physical responses to an initial trauma. So, to reduce Bruce's symptoms down to just physical stress, as if it happens in a vacuum, is to miss the point entirely. The meditation, the heart monitor, the isolation, all of these are visual and thematic shorthand to trauma survivors, or just those of us who are learning skills to manage anxiety or anger. Nonetheless, those outward symptoms are just the surface layer of what's really happening in ours and in Bruce's bodies when we experience psychological distress. The film doesn't take time to explain this, probably due to the criticisms of the prior film being too full of psychological navel-gazing. This movie wants to get us to the action, to the smashing, if you will. Bruce is trying to gain control over the Hulk. He hates it. He hates that at any moment he could become a giant green raging trauma response that endangers everyone around him. And then there's also the fact that he's hiding from General Thunderbolt Ross, R.I.P. William Hurt, who wants to weaponize the Hulk. You know, standard military-industrial complex stuff. But that's incidental to his desire to never hurt anyone again, as it was shown he'd done to Betty Ross in the opening sequence after his first transformation. Bruce is burdened by the enormous guilt of his actions as the Hulk, so he's living a quiet life in self-imposed exile. A lonely man. In fact, in the old Hulk TV show, that famous sad piano theme music is actually called The Lonely Man. And it's a fitting tune for a decent man who's haunted by his actions, and who's desperate to keep his loved ones, everybody for that matter, safe. He's a lonely man who knows that despite his good nature, he's capable of causing immense harm because of his anger. In the Incredible Hulk film, Banner at first tries to use his background in gamma radiation science to cure himself of the Hulk.
Shut up, science bitch.
But he finds that simply throwing medication at this particular problem only works temporarily, much like how medication for a mental illness is usually just one aspect of a multi-pronged approach to wellness. Taking some anti-anxiety pills for a panic disorder, or taking a gamma antidote to treat a deeply rooted traumatic response, simply isn't enough. Bruce is desperate to rid himself of the Hulk, but it will take more time and more work to truly master the rage that boils inside him.
I am untethered and my rage knows no bounds!
That doesn't mean he makes no progress in the film, though. In fact, he learns a few techniques that, for now, allow him to minimize his anger response, and in turn, minimize the harm that he causes. Meditation, pranayama, and being mindful of his emotional state may seem like throwaway elements in this movie, but they're extremely important ancillary skills that Bruce utilizes in the final act and in future films. When the Abomination is let loose in Harlem, unencumbered by morality or concern for the safety of others, Bruce knows the only way to stop his rampage is to allow the Hulk to take the wheel.
You think you can control it? No, not control it, but I don't know, maybe aim it.
And what if you can't?
General Ross is skeptical about the idea, as well as Betty. Bruce knows he can't control it, but maybe, with the skills he's developed, he can aim it. We've seen through the film that on some level, Bruce is present when the Hulk is in the driver's seat. When he was attacked by Ross's goons, the Hulk just wanted to get away, to be left alone. At Culver University, when Ross's army provoked Banner again, the Hulk smashed the army. But when it came to Betty, Hulk prioritized her safety. He was even ready to smash a thunderstorm to protect her.
It's okay. It's okay.
Somewhere deep down, Banner is present even when he's the Hulk. And with Banner comes his concern for Betty and his desire to avoid hurting people. The Hulk seems to only attack those who attack him, those who threaten his safety and freedom. The Hulk is a trauma response, and a trauma response is the body's way of keeping us safe. It goes without saying that the Hulk's able to defeat Abomination, as this is a superhero movie. But even during this clash, we see Hulk take decisive action to protect not just Betty, but General Ross too. In the end, we see Banner has isolated himself again. It would almost seem like he's made no progress at all, as a character or in trying to contain the Hulk. But in the final shot of the film, Bruce is meditating once again. This time, the camera zooms in and his eyes open, as the graphic on screen counts down quickly to 0 days since the last incident. Bruce smiles, a confident, mischievous grin. Bruce has leveled up, so to speak. He's achieved a measure of self-control that he didn't have before. He's proven to himself that maybe, in the right context, he can choose to become the monster, to aim the Hulk. The Hulk can serve a purpose. He hasn't cured himself of the Hulk, but he has realized something crucial for his next film appearance.
I'm exposed, like a nerve. It's a nightmare.
What's your secret? Mellow jazz, bongo drums, huge bag of weed. Now might be a really good time for you to get angry.
That's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry.
The most obvious change to Bruce Banner in this movie is also what I think prevents some people from accepting that he's the same Bruce as in The Incredible Hulk. He's transformed not from Banner to the Hulk, but from Ed Norton to Mark Ruffalo. There's plenty of content explaining the behind-the-scenes drama that led to this change, but it basically boils down to Norton being a stubborn control freak and Kevin Feige having none of that bullshit in this blossoming cinematic universe. Just like with James Rhodes morphing from Terrence Howard into Don Cheadle.
Don't summon me again unless you're ready for that pain.
We just need to
deal with it. Let's move on.
A criticism I've often seen repeated about this film is that Banner inexplicably can control when he transforms. And I suspect that that incorrect criticism comes from not incorporating the events of the previous film, The Incredible Hulk, into the analysis. It actually makes perfect sense when you think of how Bruce had gained a measure of self-control at the end of the previous film. Admittedly, this is where it takes a bit of effort to see the connective narrative tissue, the cause and effect, but who wants to have every little nuance spoon-fed to them? I mean, there's plenty of bad faith criticism of the MCU being superficial, hollow content. But at least in this regard, there's a pretty awesome layer of subtext that enriches the overall story of Bruce Banner. Banner is once again isolated, this time in Calcutta, but there's a distinct difference from before. He's interacting with people, helping them by providing medicine and medical care to impoverished communities. This shows a degree of self-confidence he didn't have back when he kept his head down working in a soda bottling factory.
You know, for a man who's supposed to be avoiding stress, you picked a hell of a place to settle.
Avoiding stress isn't the secret.
And it's actually an enormous step on his path to recovery, trusting his coping skills and self-control around the most vulnerable people. But he can do some good here, and ultimately, that's what Bruce Banner wants above all. Bruce's tone drops with sadness as he laments to Natasha not being able to have what he wants in life, and he subtly rocks a baby cradle nearby. He's accepted that his life can't be what he might have wanted before the Hulk manifested.
Wait. We can't do this.
We learned in the first movie that he can't even have sex without triggering the Hulk.
I can't get too excited.
I've had orgasms! I've had tons of orgasms! I've had one with your mom, dude! I will strangle you!
I'll stick my goddamn thumb through your eye!
So a family seems out of the question.
Stop lying to me!
But once again, he shows a level of self-control not possible before, when he pretends to almost Hulk out at Black Widow. That's a cruel prank, but it's one that he wouldn't have dared to attempt before he acquired a few techniques. So Banner complies and finds himself on the deck of a SHIELD helicarrier. Captain America greets him and goes out of his way to show he's unafraid of the Hulk.
Is that the only word on me?
Only word I care about.
Steve's gesture of comfort here seems to put Bruce at ease in this uncertain environment. Still, Bruce is always mindful of potential triggers.
Is this a submarine?
Really? They want me in a submerged, pressurized metal container? No, this is much worse.
Bruce is enthusiastic about S.H.I.E.L.D. only needing him for his gamma expertise, and he gets to work alongside Stark, trying to locate the Tesseract and Loki.
You know, you should come by Stark Tower sometime. Top 10 floors, all R&D. You'd love it. It's Candyland.
Yeah, shut up, science bitch!
Oh, come on, dude.
Banner and Stark bond in the lab, but Bruce isn't as excited about the possibility of a fight with Loki as Tony is.
You're tiptoeing, big man. You need to strut.
Stark thinks Banner might enjoy letting loose the Green Goliath on a worthy target. Bruce has done this before, as we know, but he probably feels like that was a one-time deal, and the risk of doing so again is too high.
The last time I was in New York, I kind of broke Harlem.
Tony Stark has been able to make peace with his disability and turn it to his advantage. And like most privileged people, he thinks Bruce should just do the same thing he did.
I don't get a suit of armor. I'm exposed, like a nerve. It's a nightmare.
Embrace the Hulk, the same way he's embraced the arc reactor in his chest.
I've got a cluster of shrapnel, trying every second to crawl its way into my heart. This stops it.
But it's not always that simple.
But you can control it.
In fact, it very rarely is. Once Loki is captured in a cell on the helicarrier made specifically for the Hulk, the Mind Stone-powered scepter begins to influence the entire team, creating emotional chaos and inflaming egos. This is of course especially dangerous for Bruce. In the midst of a heated six-person argument, Bruce reveals that at one point he attempted suicide.
The cell was just
in case you needed to kill me, but you can't. I know, I tried.
But the Hulk response was triggered and the attempt failed.
I got low. I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out.
Something many trauma survivors have probably felt, even if they never actually made an attempt. The feeling of being trapped in a destructive cycle, hurting others and yourself repeatedly, being alienated, isolated, all of this compounds that original trauma and only serves to deepen the wounds. But then Banner is triggered when a mind control Hawkeye attacks, and despite Natasha's effort to keep Bruce calm, the Hulk emerges and wreaks havoc on the helicarrier. And this is not the Hulk who shares some control with Bruce Banner. This Hulk is provoked by an extremely hostile, devious force that makes him far more irrational. Thor gives him a run for his money.
I will come down on this
Hulk
like the hammer of Thor!
But when a fighter jet pisses Hulk off, he leaps from the ship onto the jet, leaving the pilot just enough time to deploy his parachute. When Banner wakes up in a derelict building, he's stunned and confused, but he's grateful to not have hurt anyone when he landed.
Did scare the hell out of some pigeons, though.
He did scare the hell out of some pigeons, though.
Now let's say you and I go toe-to-toe on bird law and see who comes out the victor.
Son, you've got a condition.
Back at Stark Tower, Tony enthusiastically warns Loki.
We have a Hulk.
Indicating Tony is relying on Bruce to come in clutch. It's quite a vote of confidence, or maybe just arrogance? Yeah, probably arrogance. As Loki's war on Earth kicks off, the Avengers are trying to organize their strategy to fight off an alien invasion. And to everyone's surprise, Bruce comes puttering along on a crappy motorcycle just as Captain America is giving orders. Bruce knows he can be of use right now. Or rather, the Hulk can. Iron Man leads one of the flying Leviathans toward the Avengers, once again somehow overconfident that Bruce can handle it. Fortunately, he's right. Bruce calmly walks toward the giant beast, and as if flipping a switch, he transforms, wrecking the Leviathan with one punch.
I got into really good shape.
As awesome as this moment is, and I've heard plenty of people say it's their favorite moment in the film, I can still understand why some others think it comes from out of nowhere. How is he able to just transform at will like that?
Why did I do it?
Well, it went unspoken, but that devious grin at the end of Incredible Hulk conveys that Bruce had a realization. The very same thing he tells Cap here.
That's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry.
He's always angry.
The thunder of my vengeance will echo through these corridors like the gust of 1,000 winds.
That's the thing about an anger management problem. It's not like 1 minute you're calm and serene and
Rage of emotions the next.
that anger is always there, below the surface, and often it takes every ounce of control to not let it out. Bruce's secret isn't
Mellow jazz, bongo drums, huge bag of weed.
though there is a strain of cannabis called Bruce Banner.
You know,
This weed that he gave us is awesome.
yeah.
His secret is that he's always angry. The first step to recovering from trauma, whether it expresses itself through drug abuse, self-harm, panic attacks, or anger, is accepting that the trauma exists. It's always with us, and not just some fleeting emotion or impulse that comes and goes at random. Once we've accepted that our trauma exists, that it's part of our psychology, then we can move on to honing our coping skills, begin to make connections again, learn to trust ourselves and others, develop a support system, like Banner starts to do in this film, which is integral to healing. And if need be, we can beat the ever-loving shit out of a tyrannical god.
This shit's too fucking hot. God, fuck, shit, fuck.
We saw Bruce hop in the car with Tony at the end of the Avengers, becoming what the internet dubbed Science Bros. And in the post-credit scene of Iron Man 3, we learn that the person Tony's been telling his story to was in fact Bruce Banner. It's a brief cameo, but it shows that Tony is placing trust in Bruce. And despite not being a psychologist, Bruce is trying to be supportive of his friend. And it might seem like a throwaway gag, but it serves a bridge between the Avengers films and shows that Bruce is trying to build his support system. But sometimes, while we're on the path to healing from trauma, we can experience what's called re-traumatization, where we stumble in our progress, sometimes even going backward. So what happens when all the progress we've made comes undone, and you're left with more guilt and shame and self-hatred than you had before? What happens when that new support system fails you, even betrays you, and everyone sees your worst side? What happens when they see the real Hulk?
How long before you trust me?
It's not you I don't trust. The world just saw the Hulk. The real Hulk for the first time. Where in the world am I not a threat?
When Avengers Age of Ultron opens, the team is operating as a cohesive unit, showing us they've managed to become a well-oiled machine of superheroism. Even the Hulk is fighting alongside, as if Banner's really gotten a handle on the whole aim it thing. Once the fight is over, Natasha reaches for Hulk's hand and offers what seem like specifically chosen phrases meant to induce calm in the beast. This is basically a grounding mantra. Grounding is a skill used by people who suffer from anxiety, panic, anger, and meltdowns that can begin to stabilize their state of mind. It can be a phrase, it could be an object, it could be just as simple as staring at a certain spot on the wall. Whatever works for the given person. Banner has established real trust with the team and Natasha specifically. On the Quinjet ride home, Banner is in his cool-down phase. Unlike the others, being a superhero for Bruce means putting himself through an extremely intense cycle that leaves him beyond exhausted, mentally and physically. If you've ever had a panic attack, this will seem familiar. After a panic attack, anger outburst, or various other emotional meltdowns, it's common for someone to feel abnormally drained. Those stress hormones, norepinephrine and cortisol, they flood the brain, and the after effect can feel like you've run a marathon while doing quantum physics. Or gamma science.
Science is a liar sometimes.
Oh boy.
The come down period for Bruce seems more psychologically painful than we can even imagine. Yet he's made some shaky form of relative safety and stability among his teammates. He's learning to feel safe with others, even trusting. And this is a crucial phase of trauma recovery, as we have to train our minds to feel safe in benign places rather than triggered by random, inconsequential events. The problem with Bruce here, though, is that he's also intentionally putting himself through triggering circumstances, because the Hulk is useful. But forming new relationships or repairing old ones is also super important to regaining control of your life with trauma. So although Bruce is still becoming the Hulk out of utility, he's building a foundation of trust with people who care about him. At a party celebrating their victory, Bruce and Natasha do some awkward flirting, showing as Bruce is even starting to form romantic connections. He's hesitant, of course, and unsure of himself, but Steve Rogers encourages him like a good bro does for his bros.
Smooth. Very smooth stuff. Very classy. I'm learning a lot from you right now, dude.
Again, we see how these relationships are strengthening Bruce's stability and creating some sense of normalcy after years of isolation and self-hatred. And then once again, we see Bruce do a fake Hulk out when trying to lift Thor's hammer, and the others are so trusting of him at this point that they don't even flinch. In fact, they think it's kind of cringe. Then Ultron shows up. As his teammates confront Ultron off the coast of South Africa, Bruce waits in the Quinjet for a code green, at which time the situation will have escalated, requiring the intervention of the Hulk. The Avengers are, at the very least, being conservative in their use of the Jade Giant. Enter Wanda Maximoff. Wanda and her brother Pietro, guided by the genocidal AI Ultron, are suffering from their own traumas. Pietro, poor guy, doesn't get a chance to address his issues.
When I'm dead, just throw me in the trash.
But Wanda's pain is explored in the fantastic show WandaVision. At this point, however, she's still in that phase of acting and reacting from her psychic wounds. A phase that she kinda actually goes back through a few times, actually. Maybe I need to do a video on her. My friend Questing Refuge already has done a video on her. I'll link that below. But she's angry, and with good reason, but she's being manipulated by a sinister agent who has no concern for her well-being. Ultron only wants to defeat the Avengers, and he's using the twins to that end. And that puts Bruce Banner in her path, as she sets out to cause disorienting hallucinations among each member of the team. And the Hulk is once again set loose by manipulation, similar to the previous film where Loki's scepter caused him to smash the helicarrier. Who knows what she caused Banner to see, but it must have been extraordinarily upsetting. The Hulk rampages through Johannesburg, killing an unknown number of civilians and smashing several square blocks of real estate. The Hulk, his eyes red indicating he's not in control at all, is only stopped once Iron Man calls down a special armor dubbed
Veronica,
which comics fans know as the Hulkbuster armor. Tony and Bruce designed this armor together, showing Bruce is fully aware of his potential for unmitigated chaos and harm, and even with the progress that he's made, Bruce never forgets what he's got inside him, and that he might never have full control over the monster. At least he's remained pragmatic, and helped devise a way to bring the Hulk down.
All right, everybody, stand down.
Maria Hill tells the team that the public is pissed at the Avengers, particularly Banner, and they go hide out at Hawkeye's secret family farm. Here, Bruce and Natasha discuss their bad romantic timing. His newfound confidence and sense of normalcy has been shaken and cracked and destroyed.
The world just saw the Hulk, the real Hulk, for the first time.
He just did the one thing he never wanted to do again: hurt innocent people. Bruce is beginning to withdraw, to retreat back to that familiar place of self-isolation and self-hatred.
Where can I go? Where in the world am I not a threat?
He commits to helping defeat Ultron with the team, which he must feel responsible for, considering he and Tony created the evil robot that threatens to cause humanity's extinction. Later, Black Widow, having been captured by Ultron, is rescued by Bruce. Natasha asks Bruce if he's going to turn green and help in the battle.
You're not gonna turn green?
I've got a compelling reason not to lose my cool.
Maybe he means Natasha here, maybe he means he doesn't want to risk another Johannesburg. Either way, Bruce makes the choice to not Hulk out, which is a big step for him. He's thinking of his well-being and others first, and he's trusting the team to handle the job. But Natasha, ever the deceptive, manipulative spy, has other plans.
I adore you. But I need the other guy.
Dumb bitch.
This moment is fascinating to me because I believe that if not for Nat's act of betrayal here, Bruce could have recovered from his South African backslide. Instead, that choice was taken from him, and the person he'd grown to trust most, the one who could ground him as the Hulk, betrayed his trust and stole his agency. Hulk is still able to focus on the task at hand, smashing countless Ultron bots and helping the other strongest Avengers wreck Ultron himself.
With the benefit of hindsight.
Hey, big guy. Sun's getting real low.
When the fight is over and Natasha begins the grounding process to revert Hulk back to Bruce, Ultron flies by and blasts him.
I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
And Hulk's pissed off all over again. And this is an obstacle people with trauma often face, where a hostile force manages to trigger them even after the survivor has reached a point of self-control and stability. It's unfair and extremely frustrating when this happens, and it can even knock someone off the road of recovery, sometimes for a long time. And yet, the day is saved, give or take an entire Eastern European nation.
Anyway, you guys all think I'm a hero, and I'll accept that responsibility.
And as the team regroups afterward, Nat tries to ground Hulk once more. But it's too late. Hulk has decided he's better off alone, and he sits calmly on the Quinjet as it flies off into the distance. And as she explains the jet can't be tracked in stealth mode, the Hulk seems at peace. This feels safer to him after all he's been through. He built some stability and trust, and he even managed to use his rage for the benefit of others. But now, he's hurt people again. And he's been hurt by the one person he trusted most. Bruce was right to place trust in others, but ultimately it's his journey and it's his responsibility to do the work of recovery. He can't always count on others, whether it's Betty or Natasha, to calm him down from an episode. But for now, it's safer to remain the Hulk and get away from everyone. In this form, he's not vulnerable. He's not puny Banner who relies on others and takes accountability for his disability. As the Hulk, he is pure id. No doubts, no fear, no shame or guilt. No need to trust people who might betray that trust. Hulk just wants to be left alone. He's re-traumatized. The weight of his guilt and the shock of broken trust hit harder than the Abomination and the Hulkbuster combined. Hulk, and deep down Bruce too, both feel more alone than they have in a long time. It's super common for those recovering from trauma to experience these things. Well, not the Hulk and Ultron parts, but the feeling of failure. Broken trust in others and ourselves. It can feel like all the work we've done was pointless and that our life can never achieve a state of safety or self-respect. In this state of mind, we might abandon the hard work of recovery altogether, choosing instead to embrace our worst impulses, run head-on into self-harm, self-destruction, and without the support system necessary to get us back on track.
I never wear cutoffs. How do I keep waking up in cutoffs?
Normal pants going in, cutoffs coming out.
The Team Thor shorts feature Bruce in them, but they're not canon. During this period of the Sokovia Accords and the superhero Civil War, the Hulk was in control and living his best life on Sakaar, which takes us to...
I mean, in the past, I always felt like Hulk and I each had a hand on the wheel. But this time, it's like he had the keys of the car and I was locked in the trunk.
I just get so angry all the time. Always angry.
When next we find our angry green friend, he's living life to the fullest. You ever have a friend or a loved one, or maybe yourself, who parties all the time to escape their pain? Gets absolutely shit-faced.
I'm wasted!
Drives drunk, starts fights, or just generally causes chaos in their own life and others. Maybe they fall into harmful behaviors like drug abuse, or perhaps they fly into a space wormhole called the Devil's Anus.
Anus? Wait, who's anus?
Landing on a planet full of other alienated misfits and become the greatest gladiator alive by systematically smashing the shit out of every new contender? At the point that Thor finds him, Hulk hasn't reverted back to Bruce Banner in 2 years. Hulk has been treated like a rock star on Sakaar, his most destructive impulses rewarded, and he's heaped with praise by the planet's emperor. It's like he's a drunken frat boy, butt-chugging beers and punching his buddies in the dick.
Oh, God damn it! God!
But they're all doing the same thing, so they love him for it. Hulk is just the best at butt-chugging and dick-punching, which makes him a goddamn legend in this frat house called Sakaar.
Amazing, you guys guys are out of control.
Hey, Banner! No Banner, only Hulk!
Banner seems like a hazy memory. On Sakaar, Hulk can just be Hulk, and he's not only accepted, but crowned the champion with a giant bust of his head built atop the arena. He's made at least one friend in Valkyrie who's also running from her pain. She doesn't even know Hulk is anything but Hulk, and the two are actually a pretty adorable pair of friends. Hulk isn't interested in helping Thor defend Asgard from his long-lost sister Hela's evil machinations. Hulk is happy here. I mean, he has crowds cheering his name. He's got a hot tub in his room, which leads to the Hulk ass shot we didn't even know we wanted to see.
I could watch him do that for hours, dude.
But Thor and Hulk end up having a heart-to-heart in which Hulk admits a familiar phrase.
I just get so angry all the time. Always angry.
He just gets so angry all the time. He's always angry. It's a rare moment of clarity for the Green Goliath, and echoes what Bruce told Cap in the first Avengers film.
I'm always angry.
On some level, even Hulk knows that this deeply rooted trauma, expressing itself as anger, it limits him and keeps him isolated. Maybe this is Bruce pushing through to the surface.
Oh, great, now you...
Or maybe even the Hulk gets lonely too. Because when Thor gets to the Quinjet to escape Sakaar, Hulk follows him. He doesn't want his friend to leave.
Run, stay!
He's had a taste of that old friendship that he built with the Avengers, and he's bonded with Odinson over their respective internal fire.
Look like raging fire, till I like smoldering fire.
Where's the goddamn fire?
But Hulk's accidental smashing of the Quinjet activates that old video message from Black Widow, which in turn triggers Hulk's transformation back to Banner. The Hulk desperately tries to fight it, knowing that his days of being a celebrity smasher in the contest of champions are over. Bruce returns in a state of shock and without much memory of the last 2 years. He agrees to help Thor, or at least catch a ride off the junk planet, but finds himself still adjusting after such an extended binge.
The whole thing is totally different this time. In the past, I always felt like Hulk and I each had a hand on the wheel. But this time, it's like he had the keys of the car and I was locked in the trunk.
Hulk had truly gone off the deep end, and if not for his friend showing up, Bruce might have been lost forever. Banner's worried that if he transforms again, he might actually never regain control. But he helps Thor and Valkyrie escape back into the anus.
I call it the Ass Pounder 4000.
And then once on Asgard, Bruce finds himself in that position he's most afraid of. Innocent people are in danger from a big monster, and big monsters are Hulk's bread and butter. He decides to risk it, and once again lets the big guy loose for the benefit of others. Anger isn't without utility. It's not a glitch in the human condition or faulty wiring. Its purpose is to protect us from harm. If our safety or that of people we care about is threatened, anger can be a tool for survival. It can help us gain the temporary confidence and determination necessary to overcome the moment. But it only protects us in that moment. While our mind is protecting us, prioritizing our safety, that rage can lash out defensively and hurt others. And in the end, this hurts us too. When Banner was blasted with gamma radiation,
Get blasted!
the Hulk emerged and kept him alive. When he tried to kill himself, the Hulk spat the bullet out. Every time Bruce jumps, falls, or is pushed to his death, the Hulk keeps emerging to protect him. The Hulk is the manifestation of Bruce's defense mechanism. But this comes at a cost, when that same response can inflict harm on others, which only causes Banner more suffering when he reverts back and has to face the destruction he's wrought. It's a vicious cycle. Triggered, smash, guilt, shame, withdraw, triggered, smash, guilt, and shame, repeating again and again until one day we can finally truly heal. Hulk literally doesn't know when to stop. As Surtur, bringer of Asgard's doom, is intentionally set loose, Hulk tries to smash him too.
Don't smash! Big monster!
Hulk whines because he knows that's his thing. What purpose does Hulk serve if not to smash big monsters? At the end of Ragnarok, Hulk is still Hulk, though Banner seems to have some measure of agency. Hulk just stands there calmly as Thor takes his throne on the refugee ship, and they set a course for Earth. Once again, Hulk has helped to save the day. But what happens when that defense mechanism that we've relied on so many times, the anger that's never failed to smash a powerful threat, finally does fail us in the most crucial moment. When we live our life pretending that our inner Hulk is just a nuisance that we need to get rid of or to use when convenient. Our Hulks are born of trauma, and until we reconcile our pain, these monsters will remain agents of chaos, unpredictable X factors that won't be contained, controlled, or commanded.
Where's your gun?
I don't know, we should have been having a thing.
Oh!
What do you mean, no? Screw you big green asshole! Hulk, we got a lot to figure out, pal.
Avengers Infinity War begins moments after the mid-credit scene of Thor Ragnarok. Thanos and his Black Order have managed to subdue Thor and slaughter several Asgardians, with Thanos already in the possession of the Power Stone. Loki distracts Thanos, offering him the Space Stone, aka the Tesseract, and then co-opting that remark Tony had said to him.
We have a Hulk.
The Hulk gets the drop on Thanos, after presumably hiding on the ship until the right moment, which is probably a plot contrivance, but we can stretch our imagination to say that Bruce was partially in control, which allowed for an attack strategy. Before Thanos gets his bearings, Hulk gets a couple of solid hits in.
Well, that's what I want to do.
But very quickly, the Hulk is confounded by the savage skill Thanos unleashes in retaliation.
I applaud you for that. Absolutely. You know? Good. And now know that, of course, I'll come back at you with everything that I have. What do you... No.
A being with similar strength, but also ruthless, efficient combat prowess. And Thanos never even engages the Power Stone here. Hulk's never faced such a nemesis. Heimdall uses the last of his power to send Hulk to Earth so he can warn the Avengers of the coming threat. When he crash lands in the Sanctum Sanctorum, he's mid-transformation back into Banner. A subtle but awesome sign of growth for Banner, who early in the MCU was the loner, isolating himself and even saying,
Man, what are we, a team? No, we're a chemical mixture that makes chaos. We're a time bomb.
Is that now he arrives back to Earth to find the Avengers broken up.
Broke up? Like a band? Like the Beatles?
Tony is still nursing a grudge over Steve not telling him that Bucky murdered Howard and Maria Stark, and Bruce is just astonished at the pettiness of it, considering, Thanos and everything.
Listen to me. Thor's gone. Thanos is coming. It doesn't matter who you're talking to or not.
Bruce being the guy to put the band back together is such a nice touch that it can't be overlooked, and it just shows how far he's come as a character. Banner rounds up Tony Stark and Doctor Strange, and very quickly, New York City is under attack. Cull Obsidian and Ebony Maw arrive, and Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Wong, and Bruce confront them. Cull Obsidian is a massive, hulking figure, so it makes sense he'd be the prime target for Hulk.
Now get to work, Beefcake.
Okay.
But the Hulk won't emerge.
Dude, you're embarrassing me in front of the wizards.
I'm sorry, either I can't or he won't. I don't...
This chapter was by far the most difficult to crack for me. The most obvious read of Hulk's refusal to come out and play is that he'd had his giant green ass handed to him, and was either afraid or his pride was too hurt. That's what most people seem to take from it, but after the release of the film, directors the Russo brothers contradicted that takeaway. The Russos explained that it wasn't fear or pride that kept Hulk dormant, but the fact that he'd gotten a taste of freedom in the previous 2 years on Sakaar. The Hulk had full control then, and he had a great time in the driver's seat. He'd grown tired of only being called upon to fight puny Banner's battles, and in Infinity War, he's exerting some free will. I still have to think that Hulk's loss to Thanos was a catalyst for his choice to abstain from fighting, but the director's explanation does make some sense in my overall analysis. Like I said earlier, the Hulk is an expression of Banner's trauma, and it's a part of Bruce. To only weaponize it when convenient may be helpful for a while, but ultimately, the Hulk and Banner are one. Hulk has become his own aspect of Banner's subconscious, which is something seen in people with dissociative identity disorder, or DID, and that's Banner's official diagnosis in the comics, but in the MCU they've never named that specifically. When we're traumatized, especially at an early age, our minds can kind of fracture, creating another self. This can cause conditions like DID, borderline personality disorder, and other psychological and emotional disorders. In DID, a secondary expression of identity emerges as a way of protecting the psyche. As the recent MCU series Moon Knight showed, that second identity is not simply a false version of the original person, but can become a fully realized consciousness with its own needs and priorities. To learn more about Moon Knight and DID from someone more familiar with the condition, check out this video linked below and in the corner. Back in the final battle for Wakanda, Bruce is using the very same Hulkbuster armor that he helped design.
The suit's already kicked the crap out of the Hulk. Hulk, I know you like making your entrance at the last second. Well, this is it, man. This is the last second. No! Oh, screw you, you big green asshole! I'll do it myself!
Bruce is just barely able to overcome the monstrous Cull Obsidian. But in the end, the heroes still lose the overall fight against Thanos and his quest for all the magic space rocks.
Excuse me, sir. Have you...
Wow! What?
Leading to the deaths of half of all sentient life in the universe, and a lot of super gross dust all over the place. To be honest, it's probably wise to wear a mask outside after the snap. I'm just saying. When this movie ends, Bruce has not resolved the conflict between him and the Hulk. In fact, the two seem less in sync than ever. This movie is where fans really seem to get frustrated by the Hulk's arc. Some people wanted Worldbreaker Hulk, the most powerful and angry version of the character, to emerge at the last minute and save the day. But Mark Ruffalo collaborated with Kevin Feige and the screenwriters Marcus and McFeely to create this arc, and as someone who has worked through trauma and anger issues, I find this the more interesting and subversive angle. Of course, it would be cool to see Hulk absolutely trounce Thanos and his entire army, but not only would that undercut the film, it would once again take Banner and Hulk backward. They've already had one stumble on their journey in Age of Ultron, which is warranted when we consider the common stumbles of trauma recovery. If Worldbreaker Hulk emerged, the Hulk would have become the primary focus of the films, becoming the main antagonist that the heroes must defeat, just like in the comics. Then we're not watching movies about Infinity Stones and the purple guy who's been teased for 20 films. We're watching a World War Hulk film. Besides, there's plenty of rumors suggesting Marvel plans to make that movie anyway. Instead, what we got in this two-film narrative is much more subtle and honestly beautiful when seen in the right context. If you're still watching at this point, I hope you'll stick around for the culmination. I think it might change how you see Bruce and Hulk's journey, and shine a light on the wonderful, understated message that many have missed.
For years, I've been treating the Hulk like he's some kind of disease, something to get rid of. I put the brains and the brawn together. Best of both worlds. But the radiation's mostly gamma. It's like I was made for this.
Before the title card even rolls, what remains of the Avengers, now with Captain Marvel among the ranks, track down the victorious but wounded Thanos.
Let's go get this son of a bitch.
Banner, once again in the Hulkbuster armor, is seething with rage when they're able to pin Thanos down.
You murdered trillions!
Still no Hulk. Thor, upon learning the stones are destroyed, relieves Thanos of his purple head. Ew.
Is that what they call you? They call you Mr.
Thanos.
What do they call you now?
And the team heads home with the most hollow victory ever. Half of all people are gone, leaving the other half to mourn, alone, without their loved ones. Society over the next 5 years barely functions, and those left alive are but shells of their former selves. Bruce knows better than anyone what it's like to be lonely. Yet in the intervening half-decade, something happens off-screen that makes the next time we see him jarring, to say the least.
I know, it's crazy. I'm wearing shirts now.
What the hell is happening?
You ever know anybody who went through some severe shit that truly fucked their world up for a time? Like maybe they lost someone or simply experienced a mental health crisis that seemed like they'd never recover from. Maybe they became an addict, engaging in harmful, self-destructive behaviors or even harming others because they just couldn't seem to cope with that seismic shift that they went through. But then maybe you don't see them for a few years, and when you finally do, you're surprised to see they're doing great. Got their shit together, cleaned up, maybe even a family, and are genuinely happy. How did that happen? How was Bruce able to remain in Hulk form and still work on a nearly functional time machine? How was he able to gracefully hand hard-shell tacos to Scott Lang, wear fitted clothes and glasses, and reach out to his friend Thor? When Bruce finds Thor in the depths of severe depression, overeating and binge drinking, Bruce compassionately connects with the Odinson. Bruce understands Thor's grief and his self-loathing, that feeling that he's responsible for so much harm, even if Thor isn't as directly responsible as he believes. When Thor lashes out, grabbing Bruce by the shirt, a fantastic and understated thing happens when Bruce calmly asks him to remove his hand.
Please take your hand off me.
It's a tiny moment, but a brilliant touch by the Russos to express how far Bruce and the Hulk have come. But how? How did he get here? Bruce reached the final stage of recovery, trauma integration. Integration is the most crucial phase of trauma recovery, but it's one that has to be built on the foundations of stability, security, support, and coping skills that we've already discussed. You can't just jump directly to it. Integration is like placing our traumatic memories in a healthy spot in our mind. It's like the inciting trauma that shattered our perspective and created all these unhealthy triggers that have been stored in a leaky bottle all this time, on a wobbly shelf in our brain. And anytime we'd hit a bump in life, that bottle would tip over, and those distressing feelings attached to those memories would trickle out or spill, causing us to re-experience them all over again, despite the incident being in the past. Integration allows us to properly tuck those memories away in a container no different from benign memories. The integrated trauma rests in a secure, airtight bottle next to other non-traumatic experiences. The painful memories become no more triggering than that time you got caught in a sudden downpour while riding your bike home from a friend's house. Like, yeah, that kind of sucked, but you're not waking up drenched in sweat after a nightmare over it. You aren't having panic attacks or angry outbursts every time it rains. Similarly, you're not having uncontrollable reactions each time someone triggers those awful traumatic memories. This is definitely a reductive, simplistic explanation of the concept, but you get the gist. There are links below to learn more about integration and the other stages of healing. Now, even if we don't include DID in the analysis, and we just see Hulk as a more common expression of trauma, the subtext makes perfect sense nonetheless. The Hulk is part of Banner, which is what Bruce never wanted to accept.
For years, I've been treating the Hulk like he's some kind of disease, something to get rid of.
His anger isn't something he can just access when convenient and then lock away when it's not. Bruce had to reconcile his baseline identity with that part of himself that's always angry and ready to react in self-defense. The unfortunately difficult thing for us to accept sometimes is that we can't change the experiences that led to our trauma. We can cope and begin to heal and eventually integrate the trauma into our conscious mind, which takes work, and I salute anyone who has or is going through that. I relate more than I can express, and I wish I could help guide each one of you myself. The best I can do is say, don't give up. It's not impossible. You are strong enough, and you are worth the effort. And I'm happy to inform you that there's an enormous benefit to doing the work, as Professor Hulk exemplifies. There are deleted and unfinished scenes from Endgame that feature Hulk as a legit superhero during the 5 years we didn't get to see. He's wearing a costume that's not ripped apart, saving people from a burning building,
Ding ding! Ground floor, everybody out!
and then offering the firefighters tips on how to control the blaze.
Hey, Chief. So that fire's burning about 900 Kelvin. Between you and me, Halon bombs above and below the burn zone.
Yeah, I kind of wish we'd gotten this as our introduction to Professor Hulk, but I also understand from a screenwriting perspective that it would have been redundant to the diner scene where he explains his surprising new form.
18 months in the gamma lab. I put the brains and the brawn together, and now look at me. Best of both worlds.
Yeah, Bruce briefly explains that he spent time in the lab and put the brains together with the brawn. But since we've been looking at the Banner-Hulk dichotomy as the opposing psychological sides of Banner, we can assume that he also spent time undergoing therapy as well. Even as just a metaphor, the takeaway is that Bruce integrated his trauma and the Hulk into his whole being, rather than continue to fight it and react to it in a self-destructive cycle.
But then I start looking at him as the cure.
Once we integrate our trauma, it becomes a strength. It's part of us, but we're no longer reactive to it. In fact, we can utilize it responsibly to reach others, to benefit people. We're no longer a slave to our pain. Then pain becomes a tool of empathy, resilience, and a way to connect, a way to build and foster growth rather than to smash and destroy. We can even become more resilient to new trauma. And though we might have moments or days of feeling that old vulnerability again, we've already developed the tools, done the work of integration. As long as we stay mindful of our psychological and emotional states and remember those skills, we can be as powerful as the Hulk and as much of our original self as Bruce Banner. At the same time, these two aspects of ourselves integrated as one are more incredible than either on its own, more than the sum of its parts. This is no more evident than when, toward the final act of the film, just before that goddamn epic comic come-to-life half-hour battle, Banner realizes that the only Avenger capable of doing the snap to reverse the death that Thanos caused is Bruce himself.
It's gotta be me.
This might be my favorite moment in the entire Infinity Saga. I tear up every single time, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
But the radiation's mostly gamma. It's like, I was made for this.
It's like he was meant for this. He is both Bruce and Hulk. As Banner, he's able to recognize the need for it to be him who snaps, that it's mostly gamma radiation, that his unique endurance is able to take it without dying. And as Hulk, his nearly invulnerable gamma body can take it more than anyone else. This moment was made for the Hulk, it seems. All of the work, the stumbles, the entire long road to recovery. It's led him here to a moment that, due to his specific experiences, including his trauma, make him uniquely suited to take action. Bruce snaps his fingers and takes that gamma surge that would kill anybody else. It totally wrecks his arm, but he's still able to uphold the demolished Avengers compound to protect his friends. On his own, Bruce could not have done this, because he wouldn't have had the strength and the resilience. As Hulk, despite having the physical power and resilience, he wouldn't have had the awareness to maintain control, or the presence of mind that it required to focus on bringing back trillions of dead people. In the glorious final battle, Bruce can hardly be said to be the strongest there is, on either side. But he's processed his pain, he's integrated his trauma, and he's made healthy connections with so many supportive people. He doesn't have to be the strongest there is. We really don't even see much of him beyond a couple of blink and you miss it shots within all the chaos. But we don't need to. He's served a far greater purpose than smashing. For once in his life, he was able to literally undo damage and suffering, and on a level that far exceeds the harm he's caused before. No, it doesn't reverse the destruction that he's done in the past, but we can't do that in real life either. The best we can do is move forward and try to utilize our pain and our loss to strengthen others and reduce suffering, build community, lift others up and pass on what we've learned. We can make the difficult path that we've walked visible to those who have yet to find it, and maybe just a little smoother for those who have just begun.
I was made for this.
In the comics, there's a lot of backstory as to why Bruce is so traumatized. I recommend Immortal Hulk for a brilliant take on the character. But in the MCU, it doesn't even matter what his original trauma was. That's beside the point. In movies, there's often a trope in which a character overcoming trauma is able to reach a moment of resolution, and the story implies that's the finish line, all done. But life doesn't work that way. Most times we're saddled with our burden the rest of our lives, and there's no perfect moment of resolution. We have to learn to accept our trauma, to cope with it, to build a new perspective, and ultimately, to integrate it into who we are, so we can achieve some version of a new normal, a state of being in which we can not only function with our burden, but live a full life. And if we choose to, use our experiences and skills to reach out to others in need of a path forward. And based on what we've seen of the upcoming She-Hulk show on Disney+, that's exactly what Bruce is doing, helping his cousin Jennifer manage her newly gamified Hulk form, beginning with the basics.
Your transformations are triggered by anger and fear.
The Hulk, or She-Hulk, is a response to anger or fear, and learning to control how she responds to those emotional states will allow her to be both She-Hulk and Jennifer Walters, attorney at law. The best of both worlds. But thanks to Bruce, she'll have a much smoother road ahead than he did. Fucking shit. That mask is a fuck. Plus, I recorded the voiceover right before that. I get all uptight when I do that. It's fucking exhausting, dude. I legit felt like I was about to have a panic attack wearing that mask, and especially the big green titty muscle suit. Let's rap for a minute, kids. I've wanted to make this video since before I made any videos at all. It was on the initial list that I had that I, just had sitting there for months before I had the nerve to actually make a YouTube channel. I've been ruminating in my brain hole for quite a while. Don't expect another video half as good as this one ever again, but please subscribe anyway. It took me a long time to make this video because I kept getting distracted for like 3 fucking years. I was constantly getting pissed off by anti-fandoms, fascists, and just generally awful people. They're very emboldened these days. The people who weaponize outrage and sow hostility in fandoms and, the broader social fabric. When I started doing YouTube in late 2019, I had really just recently gotten to a point in my mental health where I wasn't just, reacting to my trauma all the time. I was, able to see clearly for once in maybe ever. In hindsight, it's like those chuds and reactionaries were the Abomination or Cull Obsidian, and they're targeting innocent people and, wrecking people's lives and just making life a little bit shittier for everybody. And I saw myself as the Hulk. Here's something that I don't tell anybody except the people closest to me. When I was 15, my mom died of a drug overdose, and what's worse than that is I'm the one who found her lifeless body. And on top of that, my parents just kind of sucked prior to that anyway. My stepmother was abusive, narcissistic, controlling, and both my mother and father were addicts and alcoholics. But I was close to my mom. She wasn't a good mother, really. Wasn't consistent at parenting, but she was a good friend. I mean, we talked like buddies most of the time. It was nice to be seen as not just a little kid by an adult, whereas, on the other side of the coin, my dad and stepmom treated me like, well, shit. Before she died, I was the only one in her family that even still spoke to her. My brothers, her siblings, everybody had kind of cut her out because they couldn't stand to see her spiraling anymore with her mental health and her addictions. But she was my mom. And she was my friend, She was the one person who accepted me for who I was. She encouraged my creative interests. And, without my mom, I wouldn't have had anybody to take me to the comic book shop and, rent cool movies for me and stuff like that. A lot of stuff that I still really value, and, it makes up a good piece of who I am. And I'm sure that connection with my mom really has a lot to do with that, but I genuinely enjoy this stuff too. My mom would tell me that it's okay to have strong opinions and feelings, even if other people don't like them, which I didn't get that from anywhere else. See, what I didn't know then, and only learned in the last 2 years, is that I'm on the autism spectrum. But as a kid, I was just seen as difficult, lost in my own world, not able to focus on school very well, and and I would just say shit that seemed to piss off authority figures. I did and still do just say what's on my mind. I can't help it, despite, trying for a lot of years to understand this social filter that most people seem to have and expect. One day, about a year before my mom died, her abusive husband did what abusive partners do and abused her. I tried to intervene, and I got my nose broken for the effort. I was 14 and we lived out in the sticks in Louisiana, and I ran out to the road and, blood streaming down my face, and I was like trying to flag down a car to come help us, I wasn't even really worried about my broken nose, I was worried about my mom. And something happened that unfortunately shaped how I would see the world going forward. No car stopped. Several cars drove by, they were seeing me. I'm like right there on the road waving my arms. I had blood all over my shirt and everything, and a couple of them kind of slowed down, but nobody stopped. What I took from that was that the world is indifferent to suffering. That I was on my own, basically. I couldn't rely on anybody. I couldn't rely on, even my parents, really. 14 years old, and I learned a pretty brutal lesson that day. So I think what I did was I kind of inverted it, and I started to see myself as my mom's protector. And later that night, when we were talking privately about, the violence of the day and kind of processing and comforting each other and stuff, my mom told me something that, really a parent shouldn't say this kind of thing to a kid at all. She told me that other than her grandmother who lived nearby, my great-grandmother, I was the only reason my mom had to live. Fast forward a year, and my great-grandmother died. And then a week later, my mom took too much of various substances, and she died too. And the thought kept running through my head that I had failed her, that I wasn't good enough or strong enough or didn't love her enough or didn't care enough to save her. And over the next several years, an anger swelled inside me that went on to, it defined every aspect of my life. I got in fights at school, with my dad, with my brother. I skipped school to get drunk and stoned. And worst of all, I joined a nu metal band. I was a fairly smart, capable kid who could get good grades, whenever I really applied myself. I impressed teachers all the time. But now there was all this rage that I carried just below the surface all the time. I tried to ignore it, act like I was better than it, that it didn't even exist, or that if it did, I was strong enough to just keep it in check. I refused to accept that those experiences I had fucked me up. They traumatized me. I kept pushing it down with drugs and just, opposing any authority that I didn't deem as worthy, which, is a lot of authority. And maybe sometimes it was even valid to not agree with those authorities, but the way that I went about it was just self-destructive. Eventually I realized I couldn't live that way. Eventually I took some accountability for my trauma, but it was similar to Bruce in The Incredible Hulk, where I could have some relative level of stability for a while, as long as I isolated myself and stayed away from things that, might trigger that trauma, which was pretty much anything outside my comfort zone. No, I wasn't raging out and, randomly getting into fights and stuff like that anymore, but I wasn't really living life. No real close relationships, no self-confidence, and still carrying around a shitload of self-hatred. And I was still having severe panic attacks, every single day. For a long time, I didn't even know that that's what it was. I had frequent depressive episodes, basically became agoraphobic for a while, and occasionally I would get back into drugs. Gordy, you need to leave stuff alone, buddy. You need to leave it alone. Gordy. And of course, inevitably, that raw trauma would present itself, and sometimes it would undo any sense of a normal life that I might have cobbled together. Triggered, smash, shame and guilt, withdraw, repeat. It's fucking exhausting, and I became convinced that I would never be able to live any kind of normal life. Nothing fulfilling, all I was ever going to do was hurt myself and other people. So, I attempted suicide. Thankfully, like Bruce Banner, I failed. But not because, my Hulk emerged and saved me. It's just sheer dumb luck that I survived. Then about 6 years ago, when I was at my lowest and my loneliest, once again, basically a shut-in, I finally just decided, you know what, even though I'm severely traumatized, I'd be doing a disservice to myself if I, didn't make a real, honest attempt. An attempt at healing. Recovery. Trauma creates cycles, and not just within ourselves, but, across generations, and it radiates to people around us. So, the trauma that my mom had experienced and my dad, that then was passed on to me, and, eventually I realized, I don't want to be part of this fucking cycle anymore. I was tired of the broken relationships that I'd caused. I was disgusted with myself for all of the opportunities that I'd squandered. And I hated myself for the people that I'd hurt. I could continue going through phases of, unhealthy, toxic relationships with other traumatized people because, they attract each other. Phases of alienation, isolation, depression, or I could find out what I'm really capable of underneath all that trauma. It took a while, but I found a great therapist and, got on a really good treatment plan of, years of intensive cognitive behavioral therapy. I developed coping skills, a few techniques, if you will. Meditation, mindfulness, positive self-talk, and just kind of going back through those traumatic memories and confronting them and redefining them. You have to rewrite the narrative that those traumatic experiences burned into your brain. Especially when you're a kid, but even as an adult, a traumatic experience, it kind of just burns this narrative into you that tells you a certain thing, and it leads you to a certain conclusion about yourself and about the world. And it's not true, It's just not. So you have to rewrite that narrative yourself. It sounds cliche to say, but I got in touch with that child inside me that didn't have the support and the love necessary that kids should have. And I started retroactively giving myself that. I got way back into comic books and stuff, which I'd gotten out of for a long time. But comics and movies and stuff like that, those were the bright spots in an otherwise pretty dark childhood. But by getting in touch with this stuff again, it was like I was reconnecting with the best parts of childhood, and it helped. All of this stuff together helped. I started to rebuild myself into a stable, whole person. Instead of normal Dane, who was, a pretty decent person, cares about people, wants to succeed in life. And then this other one who would come along and fucking wreck it all. I had integrated my trauma, at least the most severe aspects of it. And then I found myself in a place that I'd never been in, with some friendships and relationships that were stronger and healthier than I'd ever had. A decent job in a field that I enjoyed, using my journalism skills, which was, the one thing that I could actually give a shit about in school. Generally, I was content. And somehow, I was in a position where I could offer support and guidance for other people. I started helping my friends out with their trauma and figuring out how to get on a path to recovery. That was pretty surreal to realize. I'd wanted to make YouTube videos for a long time, but never had the self-confidence to put myself out there. And with all my, pretty specific experiences in life, I didn't think that anybody could really relate to me. But once I accepted that all that self-work that I'd done had, made it so that I was actually beneficial to other people because I could pass on what I learned, I figured, fuck it, give it a shot. So I started making political content at first, and eventually I realized I kind of have a knack for calling out awful people. Thanks to my experience with awful people, and at some points in my past, I was kind of an awful person myself. I could recognize and go toe-to-toe with the big monsters. And combined with my background in journalism and comics, I was uniquely suited to it. I could aim my trauma, my anger at worthy targets. I felt no guilt about exposing harmful people in fandoms. That's how forced adversity came about, and I was pretty okay at it. They couldn't hurt me because I'd already been hurt by life and I'd reconstructed myself from scratch. Nothing a toxic fan or a grifter could say about me could hurt me because, I've already heard it all. I've already said it about myself. And I'd made myself impervious to that kind of talk. I recognized their hostility and their toxicity as unresolved trauma. Sometimes I would even feel a little pity for them. At that point, I was kind of like Bruce in the first 2 Avengers films, beginning to trust myself and others, building a support network and close ties to people who cared about me, all while weaponizing my experience against fascists and big monsters to benefit the fandoms that I loved, that meant so much to me growing up. But YouTube, and really all social media platforms, they weaponize our anger, our outrage, our hostility, whether it's valid or not. YouTube doesn't care. And it instigates a cycle, not just in the discourse, but within ourselves, where we're reacting to the things that piss us off, because that gets the clicks, that gets people talking, that trends. We stay in that reactive mindset, and we're being rewarded for it. Our egos are being boosted, just like Hulk when he was on Sakaar. And since starting this channel in 2019, I've felt myself succumb to that bit by bit. And granted, some legitimately angering shit has happened, and continues to happen all over the world. Shit that warrants our rage at society. But I'm too old to be reacting to my anger all the time. I'll always carry anger with me. I have accepted that. But I'm at the age where if I continue weaponizing that anger all the time, even against awful people, I'll be defined by that anger for the rest of my life. And anger could actually kill me, considering, high blood pressure and panic attacks aren't great for a middle-aged guy who has a history of heart disease in his family. And that's a big reason that I stopped doing exclusively forced adversity. I was doing it a lot. It's like a self-powered machine. Once you get going, that righteous anger, that valid rage, it fuels you. You feel compelled. But I really just wanted to stop that and build a community, even if it's just a few dozen people in my Discord server, which you can join with the link below. I want to connect with people and learn from them, and hope that they can learn from my experiences too. Maybe I can't undo the harm that I've caused in my life, but maybe I can help reduce suffering going forward. Just a little bit. I'll never be entirely free of my pain, and honestly, I wouldn't want to be. Some of my favorite parts of me only exist because of my traumatic experiences. But it's been a few months, and I kind of feel guilty for not doing forced adversity at all anymore. So I'm bringing it back, in a limited capacity. I know a lot of people really valued it. I got I don't know how many emails and messages of people thanking me profusely for, being someone who speaks out about this stuff. I even managed to turn some people around who were headed the wrong direction on the fan spectrum. I inspired other people to start doing what I was doing, and some of them do it better than I do. So Patreon supporters and channel members will have exclusive access to occasional forced adversity private streams. If you're a patron or a channel member, you'll be invited to these streams probably a couple a month, and you can request topics for me to cover. We'll talk in real time on the stream. If you want to come on the stream, maybe you can come on the stream too. It'll be fun. It's not going to be a hostile thing. Want to have fun with it. I don't have to be angry all the time to do it. Most of my content is going to be the actual fandom stuff that I've been experimenting with in the last couple of months. So that's not changing. Don't worry about that. The channel is actual fandom always and forevermore. But every once in a while, it's good to aim our anger at worthy targets. There's a lot of big monsters in the world. And fascists. I started this essay thinking that at the end I'd go, and just like Bruce in Avengers Endgame, I've integrated all my trauma and, live happily ever after. But that's not 100% true. And I'd be dishonest with myself and you if I said that. Yeah, I've integrated a lot of the most awful shit. My mother's death, you know, a lot of the abuse that I experienced and stuff like that. You know, like if I hadn't integrated that shit, I'd still be a mess. But sometimes I still kind of am a mess. Sometimes I still have moments where I'm legitimately surprised by my responses. I get angry. I have moments of, you know, anger outbursts. Nothing violent. It doesn't even last longer than like 10 seconds. But it's still there. I have a few techniques that I can use to, you know, kind of calm myself down or avoid those types of moments if possible, but it's still there. It's been more frequent since the pandemic and the ongoing threat of fascism. And anytime some vile event like anti-trans legislation or, you know, voter suppression or fucking abortion bans, it's just too much to process without feeling overwhelmed and pissed off. I mean, if you're not angry at this shit, you're not paying attention. Or you're a fascist. Well, they're angry, but about dumb shit. Anyway, I'm still angry at the world. At uncaring, apathetic people. At the people in cars who just drive by as a kid is on the side of the road, bleeding and begging for help. The world is full of people who see the less privileged and vulnerable as not their problem, even when the harm being done is right in front of their fucking faces. And ultimately, it affects everybody, even if they don't realize it. And then what's worse, on top of that, society is also filling up with people who actually take pleasure in causing harm to others. How the fuck can I not be angry at that? How the fuck can you not be angry at that? Hulk is known for his anger, and his anger stems from his trauma. The Hulk is a trauma response, a defense mechanism that kicks in when Bruce feels threatened or unsafe. But why does our brain do this shit? Why does our brain carry around trauma like that? It's so counterintuitive to living a functional life, and yet it's what our brain's supposed to do? What the fuck? What is that about? The thing is that our trauma doesn't help us as much in modern society, but it did in ancient times. You know, in like prehistoric times, our trauma response would remind us of that time that we, you know, almost got gored by a saber-toothed tiger or whatever, and our trauma response would kick in and go, hey dude, don't go in that part of the jungle. Remember that fucking big cat? And you go, oh yeah, I need to fucking stay away from that. But the world, society is very, very different now compared to that, despite the fact that our trauma response has not evolved. So we're still carrying around this primitive trauma response. Yeah, it helps us survive temporarily in fleeting moments these days, but it's not sustainable in daily life, in healthy relationships, healthy communities. It's a part of us, but it doesn't have to be a destructive force. Nobody can snap their fingers and make all the suffering go away. But if enough of us take the path of the difficult self-work, self-love, healing, and integrating our trauma, if enough of us use our experiences to reach out to others, pass on what we've learned, maybe we can begin to reduce the suffering in the world. And who knows, over time, with an exponential effect that would have, maybe we can make the world a better place, you know? Or maybe it's too late already. I don't know. But either way, we owe it to ourselves to try to make our time here a little more bearable. You owe it to yourself to try. It's hard work, and as we can see with Bruce Banner, the road is rocky, the terrain is uneven, the path is windy, and sometimes we'll get knocked off of it and we'll feel hopeless. But once you've done the hard work and you've taken that path, you might find that you're uniquely suited to make a positive impact, like you were made for it. If you'd like some information on trauma recovery and integration and other mental health resources, there's always links in the description of my videos. Remember to always love yourself, even and especially when it's hard to do. I believe in you.
Forced adversary.